Hello, welcome to this UrbanByNature seminar on managing water. My name is Thorsten Balke. I'm a reader in physical geography and landscape ecology at the University of Glasgow. And today's seminar is co-organized by the Glasgow City Council and the University of Glasgow. And we'll have three fantastic speakers talking about water in a very integrated way, from water, nature, and people. We will have three presentations, each 10 minutes long. They will follow after each other without questions, and then we'll have a panel session at the end where you can ask questions. Please make use of the chat along the way. You can ask questions to all or directly to the speakers. We will either respond directly in the chat if it's a short question, or we will pick those questions up later in the panel discussion. And it's my pleasure to start introducing the first speaker, which is Deryck Irving, and he will speak on managing water, why, how, and who. Deryck is the Senior Innovation Fellow at the Hydronation Chair Research and Innovation Program based at the University of Stirling. He's an ecologist with over 30 years of experience working on urban and peri-urban Scotland. His professional interest is in the role of blue-green infrastructure and nature-based solutions in the creation of successful, sustainable, and resilient places. He specializes in partnership and collaborative working and stakeholder engagement in all aspects of placemaking, from policy through to delivery. Within the Hydronation Chair, Deryck's fellowship focuses on place-based innovation to promote water innovation and wider multifunctional solutions within catchment systems. Before joining the agency, Deryck held senior management roles in the Green Action Trust and at Green Space Scotland. Deryck, over to you.
Okay, we're all right, we're off. Can everyone see that now?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. So as Thorsten said, my name is Deryck Irving, and I work at the Hydronation Chair programme based at the University of Stirling. The Hydronation Chair is a research and innovation programme funded by Scottish Water to the tune of £3.5 million. And the aim is to bring together both an academic and a practitioner community which supports Scottish Water in its drive to transition beyond net zero by 2040. So that's 2040 for all its activities, 2030 actually for the processes that are the core of water treatment and provision. So a very ambitious aim, and certainly something we're all very much enjoying getting our teeth into. My role is very much about facilitating place thinking. So I am, as mentioned in the introduction, I'm working on every aspect of place, from planning and strategic decision making through to activity on the ground, working with Scottish Water, so looking into the sector, and working with others, so looking out from the sector. So in the graphic I've got there with the jigsaw pieces, my job is to look at the edges of the blue piece and whether it fits all the other edges, but that actually involves facilitating change on both sides of that boundary. But very much that's where I'm coming from. So it's really nice to be able to come to this today and talk about nature-based solutions and water in a fairly wide and holistic way, because I think sometimes we get focused in on very specific aspects of those agendas. So the why of my challenge. So what are the reasons why we're looking at water in this way within an urban by nature context? There's a wide range of outcomes here, which are all valid, and many are interconnected to varying degrees. And different actors within the place agenda will have different priorities across these. So we need to understand the drivers of those actors. We need to understand and identify the synergies and the conflicts. And very often we're looking at trade-offs. Very rarely will we be getting the ultimate solution for any one actor. We're looking to optimize the solutions as we move forward. And from a Hydronation Chair perspective, we're trying to do that with Scottish Water under this umbrella of net zero water and wastewater. The great advantage we've got in Scotland is that as a public body, Scottish Water is vested with duties and responsibilities that relate to all of these wider agendas. They're not purely focused on the technical delivery of water services. So they do have to look at biodiversity, they do have to look at placemaking and engaging with communities. So it's a very interesting mix that we have going on here. So if the why is all these things, and all these things potentially interact with each other, I suppose the second question in my title was how. And it's implicit in the fact we're in this particular venue, in this particular discussion. We're talking about using more nature-based solutions in this mix of activities that are carried on. I think it's fair to say it'll never be entirely nature-based solutions, but nature-based solutions should play a much, much larger part in the way we take forward each of these outcome-based agendas. At the most general level, the solutions are actually the same. It's one of the interesting things I find about the terminology nature-based solutions is the solutions are often very, very similar, regardless of what the endpoint is that you're looking for at that general level. But when we drop down into the detail of the priorities of the players and the priorities of the places that we're looking at, different ecosystem services become more important or less important in the mix. And this is where the conflicts and trade-offs come in. And it's where we genuinely need to understand primary drivers for the place that we're looking at, because it will change from place to place and context to context. In rural areas, for example, it's really easy, I think, to envisage an intervention which is around habitat creation or restoration, and it's designed to sequester carbon and enhance biodiversity and intercept runoff with benefits for water quality and reduce flood risk management challenges. That's a relatively straightforward combined concept. But the balance of those priorities for the particular catchment we're talking about and the particular set of players will determine the detail of the design and the management of any intervention that's made. And there will be levels of change across that, depending on which of the things we're most prioritizing. Are we most interested in water? Are we more interested in carbon? And so on. In urban areas, generally, carbon sequestration is less likely to be a major driver for nature-based solutions, simply because we don't have the scale of land availability to do the things that might be needed. And actually, I've been party to discussions where very simplistic carbon calculations have actually been used to argue against blue-green solutions in a retrofit situation, because at the creation level, they appear to require a significant release of carbon in comparison to continuing with things as we currently do them. But the shift to a place-based net zero water system should favour nature-based solutions in urban areas, which deliver a combination of water outcomes, water security, flood risk management, surface water management, impacts on water quality in our rivers and our waterways, and water quality in our water supply systems, while creating livable, short distance, 15-minute, 20-minute cities and neighbourhoods, creating livable, attractive places and neighbourhoods. So I think the how is actually relatively straightforward. It's at the top level, and gets more and more detailed the more we look at the individual catchments and places that we're interested in. Who? Scottish Government produced a policy framework on surface water management and blue-green infrastructure last year. And in it, there was this statement: a water resilient society benefits everyone, and therefore we all have a role to play in making sure it happens. So that's everybody from the regulators like SEPA, the agencies that are directly focused on water, so Scottish Water. Local authorities have a key role in flood risk management. Both UK and Scottish Government have a role in getting the policy and the investment right to get these things to happen. But there are other agencies with interests in the specifics of individual outcome agendas. It's down to the designers of what we do. It's down to landowners and land managers, developers, households and individuals. So there are roles for pretty much everybody in this process. The tools that we have in each of these categories and the scales of impact we have vary, but everybody can genuinely contribute at some level, even if it's just disconnecting downpipes on your house to ensure that the water, or not paving over your driveway, which is a key one that everybody talks about. But I would like to flag something up. Going back to this statement again, a water resilient society benefits everyone. Does it always? We have a real risk here of mindlessly repeating the pattern that we had with the industrialization of our society, and indeed with the deindustrialization of our society as the world changed, where we have some communities taking the hit for the benefit of others, often without any real strategic thought about whether that's an unavoidable endpoint. So the key thing I guess I wanted to finish my input and as the start point to today's session is to say that we should be seeking water management solutions based on nature-based solutions, based on natural systems, but which, wherever practicable, are designed and delivered in such a way that they deliver multiple benefits across multiple outcomes, going back to my earlier slide, but crucially support a just transition where no one is being unnecessarily disadvantaged in the process of change. So we need to think about just transition, which is a strong commitment to Scottish Government, beyond the thought of the transition to a net zero carbon economy, and actually think about the role of mitigation and adaptation in that climate justice. And really, that's all I wanted to say, but I'm more than happy to put lots more detail to any of those comments in the Q&A session. So thank you.
Thank you, Deryck. That's great, ending on a very important point there. We will have questions at the end, so if you're happy to unshare and to switch off the video, Deryck, thank you. Then moving on to our second speaker. Our second speaker is Wendy Campbell, and she will talk on water in place, a demonstrably different approach. Wendy Campbell is a regenerative place lead working on future-fitting water management that maximizes environmental, social, and economic gain. Wendy is currently employed as a place lead and national water specialist within the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, SEPA. Her previous background and set of qualifications span across environmental, business, and land use planning. Wendy works on the systems level change needed to deliver the adaptation and mitigation that will effectively respond to the interconnected climate, biodiversity, and public crises. She has a particular focus on the role of blue-green infrastructure and works alongside a wide range of partners, Scotland-wide and beyond, on proof of concept and wide implementation, including financing. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Thorsten. I'll just share my screen here. You can let me know once it's set up whether it's fine.
It's coming up. Yeah, we can see it.
Let's move a couple of things here. Everyone can see that? Okay. Many thanks to UrbanByNature for the opportunity to speak this morning. It's lovely to get the opportunity to present on some of this work with partners, close partners. As Thorsten said, I work across a whole range of multi-sector partnerships at the coalface of adaptation delivery. And this morning I'm presenting on some of the work I've been involved with embedding water resilience, in particular blue-green infrastructure measures, particularly in Edinburgh and Lothian's local authority areas within Scotland. I'll get this to move on. There we go. So I wanted to say at the outset, I think this is really important. In my view, and based on my experience, over the last decade or so, achieving place-led feature-fitting water resilience embedded as part of wider adaptation, it comes down to mindset. It's a generalisation, but Scotland tends to be ambitious and creative when it comes to their policies and strategy, but a lot less successful when it comes to the alignment needed to really drive delivery at scale in terms of water feature-fitting, water resilient measures. So about 3 years ago, SEPA, Scottish Water, and some local authority partners got talking, and we decided we would set up a programme of work focused on taking a demonstrably different approach to blue-green infrastructure delivery. We set up a collegiate blue-green city partnership working group reporting to a director-level board, and we set off on what was to become something of an adventure. This was the vision and objectives we set ourselves, and we agreed on 3 transformational work programmes. 2 of those focused on proof of concept delivery on the ground in terms of new development and retrofit, and the principles of learning from those were fed up to a 3rd programme of work which looked at the unblocking of policy and legislation. Here you see the wide range of units our blue-green city partnership interact with across the City of Edinburgh Council. Blue-green infrastructure is very much taken forward as an infrastructure, and we work across a whole raft of council units to ensure we align blue-green infrastructure design, finance, implementation and maintenance with that of other above ground infrastructures that it dovetails with, such as active travel routes, roads, wildlife corridors and many other. This is extremely resource efficient and it maximises the multi-benefits across capitals while reducing the carbon footprint of actual implementation. Deryck mentioned this as well, and the need for alignment with other agendas, the need for water resilience to align with other agendas such as net zero, just transition, 20-minute neighbourhoods, well-being and biodiversity is very much in the front and foremost of our minds. And this is supported by Blue-Green City Partnership Interaction under the Infrastructure Investment Programme Board within Edinburgh. This is representatives from both private, public and third sector, such as the Chamber of Commerce and many of the banks. City of Edinburgh Council have a high level commitment to future fitting water resilience in their water vision. This is a simple, straightforward document signed off by all committees and to which SEPA and Scottish Water are signatories and with which we work with many other partners across Scotland. The Water Vision sets a long-term and sustainable approach to river, coastal and stormwater management across the city and its surroundings, respecting the city's unique historic heritage. It recognises that all stakeholders must be involved in the flooding and water quality risks associated with our changing climate. It also recognises the need to respond effectively to drought conditions. So the Water Vision has been absolutely fundamental in driving the critical cross-council support for multidisciplinary working needed to support alignment of work programmes and agree collective priorities. These are just some of the interests that we collectively discuss and embed in GIS layers. So we have everything from active travel routes to multiple deprivation indices, biodiversity, nature networks, flooding data from both ourselves and the local authority, and modelling data from Scottish Water, multiple GIS layers that span all capitals. And those have been used to inform a multitude of different documentation and indeed the strategic blue-green network itself. So from the start, we set up our work in Edinburgh and Lothian geographies to feed up to national tables of learning. We see all the work we undertake in the Blue-Green City Partnership as proof of concept supporting scaling. Some of the key delivery focused instruments we've influenced have included City of Edinburgh's new development plan, embedding future fitting ambitious surface water management and blue-green infrastructure policies within that, with strategic flood risk assessment and blue-green infrastructure opportunity mapping, which I've shown on the previous slide, providing a strong evidence base for the collective prioritised action we wanted to take forward. We collectively produced sustainable rainwater management guidance, and this was on a requirement to provide developers with step-by-step instructions on how they actually implement BGI in different contexts and different spatial scales on the ground. That was an ask we'd had put to us many times, and we worked collaboratively and collectively on the climate risk and climate strategy documents and are heavily involved in the active implementation of those. We all very much believe that landscape design input is critical at all stages of blue-green infrastructure delivery and indeed any nature-based solution delivery, from visioning, design and maintenance planning right through to enactment on the ground, with functionality and aesthetics, beauty, being equally critical in effective implementation on the ground. In terms of our proof of concept work, this is the sort of interactive mapping we often discuss around our across partners and across the council units that we work. I know you won't be able to see this in detail without having it on your own computer, and the slides will be forwarded on. But basically it shows lots of different locations where we have green space and have the ability to store water. It shows interactions with road priorities, with active travel priorities, and it shows a lot of combined outputs from SEPA, local authority and Scottish Water modelling and data sets that we've used to identify flow routes. To date, we've opportunistically influenced 30 site level proposals. We've influenced a large scale active travel route, and we're now working on one of the big neighbourhood catchments we identified as a priority within our city plan analysis. We've strongly, in terms of our policy work programme, we've strongly influenced the shaping of our current national planning framework and are continuing to work collectively on its delivery. We're also working on a wide range of strategic water policy instruments alongside collective partners with Scottish Government. So essential ingredients, I feel all my close partners would agree on as being critical for success on a BGI scaling journey. Alignment, and Deryck reflected this as well, the importance of action being place-led with a strong community focus and informed by community need. Drawing, the importance of connecting with the private sector. There's a need to piggyback blue-green infrastructure delivery on the back of collective resolution of private sector issues, and we need to understand what those issues are. This needs to be complemented by draw up of citywide work programmes to regional and national context, and draw across to wider adaptation across the different agendas like net zero, just transition. Both of those are critical, both in terms of financing, so drawing in blended and green financing. It demands that read across and the read up. And I wanted to finish by reflecting on the people, the delivers that make all this possible. You're very much working on deep systems level change, and this work is definitely not for the faint-hearted. Critical more than anything else, I'd say, is finding the right people with the right mindset. Blue-green infrastructure at scale can only be delivered with trust, and that trust has to be earned. So I'll leave you with a few of the things that I think are really important when you're looking to find those people and make those connections. And again, those will be available on the slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Fantastic. It's really great to see all the integrative work on water management there. Fantastic. So again, please, any questions, please put them in the chat for later. We'll now move on to our third speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Stijn Temmerman. And Stijn will speak on tidal wetlands as nature-based buffers against coastal flood risks and case examples from temperate and tropical estuary. Stijn is a professor of earth sciences at the University of Antwerp in Belgium, and as a trained geographer, he studies the impacts of global change on the coasts and river landscapes and how ecosystems and human society can mitigate and adapt to global change. Coast and river landscapes are hotspots of biodiversity and human activity that are impacted by sea level rise, changing storms, rainfall patterns, floods and erosion risk, and human landscape engineering, etc. Stijn also has a personal interest in his research as he lives just above sea level, and he likes to contribute to science-based solutions to mitigate global and local impacts on coastal and riverine socio-ecological systems. This involves studies on nature-based mitigation of climate impacts, such as flood risk reduction by marshes and mangroves, climate change mitigation by carbon storage in tidal wetlands, and resilience of coastal ecosystems to sea level rise, storms, and human impacts. So we're moving slightly away from Scotland now for this talk, but given that literally all major Scottish cities are located in estuaries, I think this will be highly relevant. Over to you, Stijn.
Thank you, Thorsten. Well, indeed, I will be talking about tidal wetlands and their role in buffering coastal flood risks, and I will be talking especially about 2 case examples. But let me first start by introducing the problem. What is the problem? Well, cities and river deltas and estuaries are exposed to flood risks. And then as an example, I'm referring here to New Orleans, that is located in the delta of the Mississippi. That was dramatically flooded during Hurricane Katrina in 2005. What is the cause? Well, that is the sea level that is surging by several meters. And in this specific case, this is due to a storm surge, a hurricane, which is simulated here. You see a simulation of the storm surge that is generated over the Gulf of Mexico, and it is propagating towards the Mississippi Delta as the hurricane moves from the ocean towards the land. So it is the low air pressure and the strong winds that are actually causing the surge of sea level. And that, of course, that sea level surge is propagating as a long wave through river deltas and estuaries, exposing people and assets to flood risks, as is illustrated by this very schematic animation. And that is exposing cities to flood risks all over the world, actually. Here you see on this global map, people in cities exposed to 1 in 100-year flood risks by 2070. And as you can see, those are especially large cities located in deltas and estuaries, here indicated in the light green and dark green colors. Now, in the next, I will illustrate, or I will continue on 2 case examples. One is on the city of Antwerp in Belgium. So where are we? We are in the southern part of the North Sea. And the next slide shows you a map of this estuary. The city of Antwerp is located at about 90 kilometers from the mouth of the estuary in the North Sea. And it is exposed to storm surge flood risks. Actually, not only the city of Antwerp, but also other areas along this estuary. And it is illustrated in the next slides. For example, here in Zeeland, we are then in the southwest Netherlands. We've seen dramatic flood events. For example, in 1953, killing about 1,800 people. Also, the city and port of Antwerp was partly flooded during that storm surge of 1953, but also more recent storm surges are causing risks of flooding in the city of Antwerp. And moreover, if we look to records of tide gauge measurements, we see that the tides are rising in Antwerp, and they are rising twice as fast as at the coast. So both the yearly mean high tide level, which is indicated in orange, is rising, but also the yearly maximum high tide level, which are mostly storm surges, is clearly rising at a rate that is twice as fast as at the coast. So why is this? What is happening here? Well, actually, human land use changes within the estuary are aggravating the flood risks. This is a map again of the estuary. About 100 years ago, let's say, it's indicated in light green the extent of natural floodplains, tidal wetlands, tidal marshes, which covered about 1,000 square kilometers in this estuary about 1,000 years ago. This is just a picture to illustrate how a tidal marsh looks like. It is actually daily or twice a day, in this case, flooded at high tides and drained at low tides. So it acts actually as a natural floodplain. Nowadays, today, only about 35 square kilometer of marshes remain. How does that come? Well, for example, if we zoom into this area, this is an aerial picture showing the typical view on the banks of the estuary, and we see huge dikes, large, wide, and high dikes, and only small marshes that are remaining and that are flooded at high tides. And actually everything which is behind the dikes were formerly marshes, but were converted to agriculture. So there's no tidal flooding happening anymore. What is the consequence of this land use change? Of course, about 1,000 years ago, tides and surges that come from the North Sea and enter this estuary, they were actually spreading out and they were dissipated and attenuated in the large marshes. And that's different, of course, today. Today there are dikes very close to the estuary banks. There are few marshes left. So tides and surges are pushed higher and more inland in the remaining channel. And that's why actually, flood risks are vastly increasing. Now, what can we do about that? How can we protect us against flood risks in an estuarine or a deltaic context? A classical strategy are engineered coastal defenses, defense structures like dikes or levees, or you can go even further by building storm surge barriers and dams that close off complete estuaries like they have done in the Netherlands. But this is very expensive. For example, for the Netherlands, it's estimated that the yearly cost to maintain this infrastructure will increase to 1.6 billion euro by 2050. So it's difficult, it's a challenge to sustain this infrastructure. Moreover, there are negative ecological impacts. For example, those dams that close off estuaries, they disturb the water circulation, they trap organic matter behind the dams, leading to anoxia, toxic algal blooms, and fishery collapse. And I've shown you already that actually in the long term, building of dikes increases the flood risks because it raises the high water levels in the remaining channels. So therefore, we need to search for alternative or complementary strategies to improve the flood safety along estuaries and deltas. And one way to do that is by nature-based flood risk mitigation. The concept, I think, is pretty clear, but it's illustrated again here with this schematic animation. So sea level surges, they are the source of the risk. They propagate as long waves through estuaries and deltas. And wetlands, by conserving and restoring wetlands along an estuary or a delta, we can reduce the high water levels because actually the water can flow into those wetlands. Here illustrated in the drawing by mangrove forests in the tropics. In temperate climates, it will be salt marshes. Yeah? They act as flood buffer areas. And moreover, they are also self-sustainable through sediment accretion with sea level rise. And they provide co-benefits through other ecosystem services, like it was mentioned already, carbon sequestration, but also water quality regulation, fishery production, recreation, biodiversity. Yeah? Now, let's go back to the Scheldt estuary then and the city of Antwerp as our case example, where the Sigma plan is a flood protection plan for the Flemish part of the estuary, so that's the upstream part of the estuary, which foresees, on the one hand, and indeed maintaining and strengthening dikes in places where, in front of the city, for example, but also it foresees in the restoration of marshes, so the reconversion of parts of the formerly embanked marshes back into marshes or in controlled flood areas over an area of about 40 square kilometers distributed along the estuary, as you can see. Of course, you can only do that where there is only, let's say, agricultural development in the former area and no or few housing, because that's of course very difficult to relocate that. This is an example of such a marsh restoration area during a storm surge. Also here is another one, and very clearly also showing the surrounding urbanized area. Now, with models then, with computer models, we are able to estimate, let's say, assess the efficiency of this kind of flood protection plan. In this model simulation, we simulated a 100-year storm surge. And we simulate here the high water level along the distance along the estuary. And as you can see, well, in the dark, what is it, in the brown dashed line, it's the present situation, or let's say it's the pre-2005 situation before the plan. And then in the green dashed line, it's by 2030 when all marshes will be restored. Many of them are already restored, but not everything yet. And then by then we simulate that the storm surge will be reduced by 60 to 80 centimeters over large parts of the estuary. And what is interesting to note here is that it is especially effective in the upstream parts of the estuary, where the estuary becomes very narrow and where flooding of water into wetlands has a proportionally more effect on the reduction of the surge. More seaward, it is very difficult actually to have a significant effect on the surge level. Coming back then to our global map, I think this kind of nature-based mitigation in the context of deltas and estuaries has a high potential for several cities, especially the ones here located or indicated in green, and that are the really big ones, of course. But of course, as Thorsten already mentioned, also in Scotland, there are several cities or towns and urban areas located along estuaries with potential scope for nature-based flood risk mitigation. To end with just one more example here from a tropical system in Ecuador, Guayaquil, where we are also working. Here we are in the big delta, the delta of the Guayas in Ecuador. Flood risks come here from sea level surges caused by El Nino, not by storms, but it's not fundamentally different actually. There are also sea level surges. And well, in this delta, there is a big city, the city of Guayaquil, with about 3 million people living in the delta plain. And that's something we see, of course, in many estuaries and deltas. Cities, large cities have historically developed there for port activities, for example. What else is left in this delta are large extents of the natural floodplains, marshes, but also what is very typical in the tropics, that is that the mangrove forests are cut and replaced by aquaculture ponds, by building of dikes and creating aquaculture basins for shrimp cultivation, for example. Now in the next slide, I will show a model simulation of surge propagation along the red transect indicated here in the effect of mangroves. So this is actually now simulating, or the animation is showing a simulation of the sea level surge, how it is propagating through the estuary. And in the next slide, what I will show in the next slide is actually the high water level resulting from that surge propagation. So that's the top of the gray zone on this slide. So the high water level, how the high water level is changing along the estuary. And this is the situation for normal conditions. Let's say this is the situation for El Nino conditions when sea level is surging. And this is a model scenario where we have converted all mangroves into aquaculture, illustrating that conservation of the natural wetlands contributes to mitigation of high water levels. So my take-home message is here. Okay, storm surges, they propagate, or let's say more in general, sea level surges propagate as long waves through estuaries and deltas, exposing people and assets to flood risks. And as one strategy to complement traditional engineering. Wetland conservation and restoration provides nature-based flood risk mitigation, and they provide multiple co-benefits through other ecosystem services. Okay, thank you. That was my presentation.
That's great. Thank you, Stijn. Fantastic. If you could unshare the screen, can I ask all the other panel members to come on screen? And then we'll start taking a few questions. So please put your questions in the chat. And I will start with the first question that's been that's posted, and that's by Rob. Many local councils we work with show some hesitancy towards maintenance of the proposed new blue assets like rain gardens with public funding heavily squeezed. How can this issue be addressed? So I guess this is either for Wendy or Deryck.
I'm happy to start if you like, Thorsten. So a few thoughts, Ben. I think initially it's reducing the amount of money that has to be spent in the first place. So elements that spring to mind are taking the community with you on the journey to, if there's an existing community in the area, working up water resilience measures with their input and tying it in with other needs that they have from their place can be a good way of getting community ownership and in turn reducing the maintenance outlay at the end once those are in place. Other elements of that are ensuring that what's put in is fit for purpose, so ensuring that the planting is appropriate and that you're not part of the maintenance isn't going back and replacing those plants. So that is why I think the landscape architect input is so critical, and to ensure, and also in ensuring that what is actually designed is built out, and again why we developed the sustainable rainwater guidance for the development industry so that they could work across professions with that. Then in terms of other measures, I think holistic place-based funding for public sector is something that we're really pushing for, because at the minute a lot of the funding that comes in tends to be for an element like active travel, or there isn't really holistic place-based funding available, and that's what a lot of the directors that I work with would like, because it gives them that flexibility to dovetail all the requirements of all the infrastructures above ground, including the maintenance of that, and make their money, make best use of the public purse, if you like. Longer term, I think there's the drawing of other finance, blended finance and green finance that could contribute to place-led blue-green infrastructure. And there may be an opportunity to relook at duties, because money tends to follow the duties, and at the minute public sector duties are not totally in alignment with future fit, I would say. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, can I just pick up that last point that Wendy made? I think Rob's questions are really important, because maintenance and management of blue-green solutions and nature-based solutions is actually a key part of the challenge. It's one of these bits about mindset. I think the local authorities, if I'm very, very untactful, because I know there's lots of local authority colleagues on the call, local authorities do two things at the moment because of the pressure. They do things that they're paid to do or funded to do, and they do things they're required to do. And that's where the duties section has not caught up yet. So I think there's an element of policy shift that's required. And I think also we need to look very carefully at the way that we distinguish between capital and revenue spend, because we're still in a situation where it's possible to raise huge amounts of money to build things and practically impossible to manage them because of the way the budgets are set up. So there is some fairly high level change that's needed. But I think beyond that, we're looking at what we mean by risk and responsibility, because I think at the moment, I've had 10 to 20 years now of working with people across public and private sector who tell me the current system doesn't work, but actually we don't change it. So therefore, we're going for the high risk option, not the low risk one. So there are some quite significant things we need to think differently about before we can get this right. There are demonstrators of how it works. And I think that multiple actor thing and multiple agenda thing is one of the ways to at least level out the concerns. But I think there's still a requirement for some fairly strong policy shift. And that's why the stuff in Edinburgh is so interesting, because Edinburgh is committed at the highest level of the authority to the fact that the future will look different. And I think that that's probably the driver that everybody else needs then to fall in line behind.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was just kicked out by Zoom, but I'm back now. So there's another question that came in, which I will just read out to you. What do the panelists think about the resilience of the communities that they work with? Communities, whether they're professional or those living in an area, can be resistant to change, particularly if they have seen interventions fail in the past. So I think this probably applies to all panelists. I know there's been some resistance in Belgium as well. So maybe Stijn, if you want to take that.
Yeah, that's indeed, well, the example that I gave is, let's say, to be clear, it's really very much coordinated from top down, let's say. So it's very much coordinated from the central government, let's say. But there has been a lot of social resistance against it. And what is particularly interesting in this case, I think that the estuary is part in the Netherlands and part of it is in Flanders, in Belgium. And the policy or the level at which there was, they reached societal carrying capacity for wetland restoration is very different, actually. So in the Netherlands, there's still a lot of resistance against those projects. And of course, the Netherlands has a very long history of fighting against the water, let's say, and reclaiming land from the sea. So giving it back is very, very difficult for many people in the Netherlands. In Flanders, they reached, I think, a higher carrying capacity, really by investing a lot in informing the people about the advantages, the multiple co-benefits, not only in terms of flood risk mitigation, but also in terms of recreation, giving opportunity to local people to start recreational businesses like tourism, and involving and having a lot of stakeholder meetings actually with the local people. So they did a lot of effort on that and are still doing that. I'm also living in the area, so I'm also joining those meetings as someone really living very close to those project areas. And that seems to work. So that is really very, very important. And it's a process of many years that is going on already here.
Thank you. Deryck, Wendy, from your point of view on communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting from the perspective of the Netherlands and Belgium there. I think there's a few things, and I know that Gillian, who asked the question, will probably already be nodding before I start speaking on a lot of this, but I think this is where the place approach is key. I think there's a real danger that if we come in with, this is a solution to one specific problem and we're going to do it, do you agree or not? The reaction for most people, including myself, is to say, no, I don't agree because you haven't asked me about it and you haven't told me what you're doing, you haven't told me why. So there's something about involving people in the widest sense, so not just residents, but people who use the area, people who work in the area, businesses that are tied to those areas, as early as possible in the discussions, and presenting wherever we can the water management solutions as actually a tool and an opportunity for some of the other changes that people are looking for in the area. So we're not just saying, and sometimes we will be. Sometimes we're saying there is a problem here. It's acute. We have to do something about it. This is the only way we can move forward. But wherever we should actually be much more creative about it and involving people in a way that allows them to contribute rather than merely react. And I think the other point, which is the one that, going back to my last slide, is that we also need to understand that where people are going to be disadvantaged by the solution, we have to build that into our thinking, and if possible, find ways to recompense and offset that disadvantage. And it's a fascinating one that I'm seeing at the moment with quite a lot of discussions about nature-based solutions in upland areas in Scotland, where land managers very often are not disadvantaged. It's cost neutral. But actually, the landowners, the land managers, the people who actually manage the individual land may well lose income. And at the moment, we haven't quite worked out how to offset that loss. and agricultural subsidies need to change, and all sorts of other things do before we actually get to that completely. But I think it's mainly just about treating people with some respect and understanding that their views and their understanding and knowledge is a value. I've done it in the past, not on water, but sometimes you say to people, okay, if it hasn't worked before, can you tell me why you think it didn't work? And can we design that knowledge into the way we move forward? So actually people become part of a learning iterative process rather than just reluctant. So.
Thank you. Wendy, you have something to add?
I would probably have said a lot of what Deryck said, but just from an Edinburgh perspective, something that we're trying to do to sort of support the community engagement side of things. Like, we were very fortunate. The stage that we started this work at was at the start of Edinburgh's city development plans, so we had a lot of community engagement opportunities built in there, you know, that were part of that procedure, and we very much piggybacked a lot of our community engagement on the back of that. But we are aware that there is a need across the authority to have sort of a toolbox for community engagement that ties across all the agendas that we've spoken about today, you know, that ties across from water resilience to net zero to just transition, so that people, when they're speaking to communities, are speaking to them in a holistic way and starting, as Deryck says, with what do the people want from their place, and trying to tie in those agendas then to that picture. And I've seen great use of you know, creative individuals out working cross-sector, you know, round a collective table to sort of set out clearly what the community want and tie in these other agendas then on the back of that, rather than the other way around, which I think is often the way it has been done in the past.
The only thing I would add is there's a need to demystify what we're talking about as well. And there was a fascinating report published last year by Citizens Advice Scotland, looking at the experience of communities from the engagement they've had with people like us, consultants and public bodies and local authorities. And what that was showing was that actually very often people did not understand what it was they were being asked to engage with. And one of the things I took from it was actually sometimes they did think they knew what we were talking about, but they didn't. And actually that's even more dangerous because they're going off on a tangent from the discussion. So I think there's a real need to use skilled engagement practitioners and to do it as creatively and on as level a playing field as possible, because otherwise we're really at risk that we'll talk and talk and talk. And when we get to the detail of what we do, people will say, well, that wasn't what we discussed. And that's even worse, because you've then disempowered them as in the process of trying to empower them.
Thank you. That's great. I think that's really insightful discussions. I don't see any further questions in the chat at the moment. So unless anyone has another question to add, I think we're probably fine. So the video will be posted on the UrbanByNature webpage for those who couldn't attend today. And there will be another UrbanByNature seminar on soils that will be communicated through the channels where you received your information for today's seminar. So I would like to thank all the speakers for their time and all attendees. That was really, really great. And to sum up, I think the solutions are there. They are nature-based, and we just need to speak clearly and engage with the public to make that happen. So I think we can be optimistic, hopefully, that we'll see a greener future in water management in the future. So thank you very much, and see you next time.